Hey, good morning, Keith.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. You know, it's always a great day when you color coordinate your coffee and your hoodies.
You are so thoughtful.
Hey, leave no detail ignored or whatever,
Yeah, I
or something
understand.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah, well, I have coffee and I have a shirt, so that's really all that matters.
we appreciate the shirt. So, this morning, um, I think we get to talk about something that's really, really important. So many people either A, don't know very much at all about the Old Testament, or B, if they know anything about the Old Testament, it's often from some childhood memory of going to a vacation Bible school or a Sunday morning, Bible school class, and often the takeaways, the memory of those incredible stories often sort of stay at that infantile, I was a kid and I heard about Jonah and the Ark or something, or Jonah and the whale, or
Jonah and
Jonah
the
and the
Ark.
big fish. Yeah, exactly.
You mean Joan of Arc, right?
Yes,
A
which
lot of
would
people think Joan of Arc is in the Bible.
hey, don't you like the way I linked two important stories in
Yeah,
one, right? Like, I mean, come on,
yeah,
that's high level.
yeah. That
You
was
didn't,
that was that was impressive.
yeah, what you didn't see was the comma, Jonah, comma, the ark. But but anyway, we have these, few stories that we remember, but there are some really powerful and um, applicable accounts in scripture of godly men and women going through all sorts of situations that have modern day meaning to us. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. I think, with the Old Testament, it can be a little intimidating. It's a lot of like really big names, and you don't even know how to pronounce this person's name or this place or whatever. And it's a bunch of old stories for old people, and it can be pretty intimidating. And so I think a lot of people maybe shy away from it, veer away from it, and while the New Testament is our authority, as it says in Romans 15:4, the things that were written before were written for our learning and our admonition. And so if we can struggle through some of the hard details, we can find some learning and admonition, which is what it was meant for.
Yeah, and with that in mind, you and I had been talking about some of our um, favorite Old Testament stories, accounts for people who don't like the use of the word story when we talk about the Old Testament. But one of those that stood out to you was um, some of the events in the life of Elijah. And, you can find him in First Kings. And so what we're going to do this morning is we're going to talk about, in particular, First Kings 19, and you listed it very high in terms of its value to you and what I think you think is value to a lot of people. So what is it about Elijah and what takes place in First Kings 19 or First Kings 18 and 19 that is so important to you?
Yeah, I do think you have to have those two chapters, the events of those two chapters together, because they definitely go together. I think one of the things that's fascinating about this to me is how relatable he is. We may think some of the people in Scripture, even in the New Testament, like Paul, like I just can't relate. I'm just not like him or whatever. Well, if you read First Kings 18, you might feel the same way about Elijah. And for those, just a real quick Cliff Notes
Please,
version,
please.
he went up there and he was a man. I mean, he took on these false prophets. Can you imagine being in an arena where there's 800 enemies against you? And not only that, he's pretty bold. Like, hey, you know what? Tell you what, let's just pray to your gods and bring down fire. And he's almost smarting off at them. Sorry, not almost. I think he is.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say when they're
Yeah.
into their gig for several hours and their god hasn't done anything, and he's like, "Hey, maybe he's on the toilet," you know.
Maybe he's asleep. Yeah, I know. Every time I read that, I'm like, ooh.
it's
Because he was, and it wasn't like he had these armies of people Like he's up there with these bad guys all by himself, and he's not backing down, and he's victorious.
Yes.
And you look at that and think, wow, man, I don't know, I couldn't, because I'm not even so bold, wherever, at work or wherever. But then you look at chapter 19, and suddenly he's human, like, and he's very different than he was in chapter 18. And I think sometimes we may feel the same way. Some person might feel like, sometimes I'm really strong, and then other times I'm just really weak, you know. And even Paul said that in Romans, right? He's like, why is it that I don't do what I should and do what I shouldn't, and I think sometimes people get discouraged because they they don't see themselves always being what they ought to be. Well, if you ever feel that way and you want somebody to relate to, Elijah is your man, because he was incredibly strong in chapter 18. Literally, just days later, he was incredibly weak, and I call it the Elijah syndrome. What he had in chapter 19 was the Elijah syndrome, and I think maybe a lot of people um, feel that sometimes too. It's a combination of depression, despair, self pity. There's a number of things. So, for the sake of time, I don't think we're going to be reading everything in chapters 18 and 19. But the bottom line is he has this great victory, but then the wicked woman Jezebel hears about it. She sends a threat out to him, and suddenly he's running like a little girl. Like he went from this bold, victorious, macho man, and now he's running for his life from a woman, a single. He took on 850 false prophets in person. And now he's running from the threat of a woman he can't even see. And so we think, how can that be? Well, all of us can fall into this Elijah syndrome, where we're just down and discouraged and depressed and feel defeated, and maybe even self-pity comes in. And so what I think maybe a lot of people can relate to chapter 19 much more than chapter 18. And what I thought might be good today is just kind of talk about some of the causes. Like, how did this happen? Well, it isn't without cause. And if you look back at the situation, it wasn't just, it's not some unknown reason why he went from the hero of 18 to the, depressed guy under a tree in 19. So I just want to look at a few of the causes of the Elijah syndrome. Anybody who's listening may find themselves either currently or sometime in the future feeling like Elijah did, not in 18, but in 19.
Awesome. Why don't you jump in?
Okay. Well, I think one of the keys, if you go back and look at chapter first, and if anybody's listening, now is a good time. Just go ahead and open your Bible or your app to 1 Kings 19. One of the things I noticed in that text is he wasn't thinking clearly. When he suddenly is depressed and discouraged and all that, the bottom line is his emotions had gotten the better of him. And he was viewing things not in a factual way, but in an emotional way. And sometimes those are very different. And so, he failed to consider the source of his discouragement. It wasn't God. It was Jezebel, right? And yet he's blaming God. He's just really frustrated with God and everything else. And he's just not thinking clearly. And this is the same guy who's taking up for the true God in chapter 18, and now he's just, he's just not thinking clearly. And how many times does this happen to people when life really throws them a curve, when they are really dealing with a lot of issues and problems? Instead of thinking clearly that this and this and this is what's causing all of this, instead sometimes they either blame or question God, and they don't recognize the true source of what it is they're feeling because they're just not thinking clearly.
Yeah, you almost think that after the great victory in chapter 18, it's as if Elijah may have expected to be able to just do a little victory lap and hey, I just won, or, and then yet his life is still at risk because of Jezebel. And maybe there's a sort of a, like in athletics, we talk about the the um, uh, the dump of your adrenaline dump, right? And you had this incredible moment in chapter 18, and then it's like, uh, and as opposed to being able to be victorious, you're still at threat. And I say that just because when you talk about thinking logically versus emotionally, that's a very emotional state. And yeah, he's certainly not thinking clearly and placing blame in all sorts of wrong places.
Yeah, yeah, and so he just wasn't thinking clearly, and he after what he experienced in chapter 18 on Mount Carmel, and the power of God and how God came through, you would think he would never, maybe ever, question God, and certainly not a few days later. But that's what's happening. I mean, he saw a demonstration. He saw God's demonstration more powerfully and clearly than you and I ever will. I mean, he literally,
Amen.
and yet here he is. And so nobody's immune to it. But the reality is he just wasn't thinking clearly. And so that I think if we find ourselves under the proverbial juniper tree, like Elijah was, maybe we need to just, if we can reel it back a little bit and think clearly, we might be able to identify the source of what's making us feel this way rather than just go with the emotion of it, and in turn either blame others or God or whatever else.
Yeah, because you're never gonna fix whatever it is that's put you under the juniper tree if you aren't able to itemize how you ended up there and thus address the real issue and not the emotional issue that may not be the real issue.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that leads us to another cause is not only was he not thinking clearly, but he had separated himself from a strengthening relationship. If you go to verse 3 of 1 Kings 19, it says he left his servant. He had somebody with him, but he left that person. That person didn't leave him. He left them, and he went off by himself. And so in other words, he chose to be alone. He there was a relationship that could have strengthened him. There was a person who could have maybe brought some reality into this, but he left him and he went off by himself. And lonely people are discouraged people. And Elijah needed then more than ever, he needed a strong companion. He needed a strengthening relationship. But he's the one that walked away from that. No, I don't know exactly why, but he did. And I think for anybody who's finding themselves currently discouraged or down, sometimes the tendency is to pull away. It's not. I mean, it's like pretty much the last thing we really need to do. But the tendency is to pull away. But the truth is, we all need somebody who can bring some strength, who can bring some encouragement, who can bring maybe even some objectivity to what it is we're dealing with. And he had that, but he left that. And so, and in doing that, he was worse off because of it.
Yeah, and how often do we still do that kind of thing where the person that maybe is most beneficial to you or most potentially beneficial to you is the one you ostracize, the one that you relegate to a place outside of your circle where they're able to influence you. And as you said, I mean, that's the exact opposite of what we should do. We should seek those bonds and those relationships that are going to help us get through and not um, kill that source of strength, encouragement, assistance, clarification, direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12 talks about how that, two are better than one. If you're alone, you fall, then you can't get up. But if you've got some help, a three braided cord can't be broken. I mean, there's just some practical wisdom in that. And in a very practical way, anybody who's feeling down and discouraged and depressed and despondent, notice all these negative words start with a D. If you're feeling one of these D words that we're talking about, Probably, maybe a little
That's deep, Katie.
solitude.
That's real deep.
Yeah, deep. Maybe a little solitude is helpful, but not for long. I mean, it really isn't. And we do need a strengthening relationship, but it's somebody who can bring encouragement and maybe even objectivity, because we can't always see things as they were. He wasn't thinking clearly. We know that in hindsight. What if he had had somebody who could help him see more clearly? And and maybe his servant was trying to help him, and that's why he walked away. I mean, how many times we just, yeah, whatever, and so I don't want to hear what you're saying. And maybe I don't know. We would have to infer a lot of things, but the bottom line is, after he separated himself from his servant, is when he went into really. That's when he goes and sits under the tree. That's when he wishes he could die. That's when, and he didn't have anybody with him, and he really needed somebody at that time. And so I think there's a practical takeaway for us today, uh, as we deal with these emotions sometimes.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. What's next in the Elijah syndrome?
Well, yeah, if you look at it, you see that he was, in addition to like emotionally and mentally, he just wasn't thinking clearly. He was also physically and emotionally exhausted. You had mentioned that the adrenaline dump after a big victory, um, of any sort, it's somewhat natural to suddenly go down. You go from the peak to the valley, and he had this great challenge on the mountain, and it had to be stressful though. I mean, I know he was confident God was going to come through, but I mean, surely he's wondering what if. And so that was a big stressful event. It was a big victory. Now he's running for his life. He's living off the land, and suddenly, he is physically. By the way, if you look at the map of where he started, Mount Carmel, and where we believe he went to, it was a long way down to. So he's traveling. He didn't catch a Greyhound or a flight. I mean, he is physically and emotionally exhausted. And this is one of the clinical symptoms of depression. When people are, when they run and run and run, either not physically but otherwise, they become emotionally exhausted. And um, and when a person is physically and emotionally exhausted, it does make them much more vulnerable to not thinking clearly. um, but it also puts them in this vulnerable state where, things just, they do not appear as they really are. And I think we find a man here who is physically and emotionally exhausted, and that made him vulnerable to these emotions.
Well, yeah, and your your ability to perceive reality is going to be highly distorted
Yeah,
in that, which is, starts to come out when he speaks in these super morbid, lonely ways of, I'm jealous for you, God, and I'm doing all of this. I'm a protector, I'm a defender of your name, all this, and I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left, which we, come to find out is not even close to being true.
nope.
But in those emotional states, our ability to perceive reality for what it is just goes out the window.
Yeah, and I think he really thought that. I think he really thought what he was saying. I think he, you know, but again, that's the tricky part about being in this spent condition, is it doesn't allow us to see things as they really are. And I mean, you notice he's napping. He's laying down, he's napping, and he's getting some food, and he's just spent. And there are a lot of people who are spent just by the schedules that they have to keep or they choose to keep, the emotional strain of problems and challenges, maybe in their family or their finances or their careers or whatever it is. And you see, I don't think he knew that he was exhausted, but he was. And I think maybe a lot of people are running around completely physically and emotionally exhausted, and they don't know it. Therefore, they don't know that they're not perceiving reality
So,
as it really is. And it's leaving them feeling this really down, depressed, lethargic, um, you know, condition that they're living in, very similar to the one that Elijah was in. And so, we'll talk about more about this in a minute, but we have to keep an eye on the fuel tank. And when that needle starts getting low, we need to do something about it.
Do you want to talk about that?
By the way, I will in a minute, because in a minute I'm going to talk about what he did to change it, the syndrome. But that strengthening relationship can bring this to the table as well. But again, he didn't have that. He chose to walk away from that, and so he wasn't getting any help there either. And one last thing I would say that caused him to be in this condition is he gave in to self-pity. He, and again, he's not thinking clearly. He's exhausted. He has nobody there to bring objectivity or encouragement. And he just gives in to self-pity. And by the way, self-pity always exaggerates. And you just mentioned one of them. He says, I'm the only one that's left. Oh, come on. It's easy for us to say, oh, come on. But in that condition, he really felt like that was the case. So now he's feeling sorry for himself. I've tried to do all these things for you, God, and this is what I get. And, oh, poor guy, and we're sitting here objectively looking at it going, yeah, cry me a river. But the fact is the person in that situation can't recognize that. And all they do is feel this self-pity, and the temptation to just give into it is great. And the things he was saying was not true, but he probably felt like they were true. They seemed true. And in some way, perception is reality. But in his giving into all this self-pity, it didn't make anything better. In fact, it only made things worse. You think about how many times we've been kind of down in the dumps and done the exact same thing. And instead of realizing how blessed we are, or realizing, things that are positive and good, we can only see what's negative, even to an exaggerated state that isn't even true. But he gave into it. The temptation to give into self-pity is going to be there, but nobody has to ever give into it. So you think about the fact, so he had this great victory, but now he's running for his life. He wasn't thinking clearly. He didn't have anybody to give him strength or encouragement or even objectivity. He's exhausted. He's giving into self-pity. I mean, when you look at it like that, you're like, well, no wonder he's sitting under a tree going, I think I wish I was dead, And so, but, the good news is the story doesn't end there. So there may be people listening today think, well, I'm not completely under the tree, but boy, I sure haven't had a lot of pep in my step, and I sure have been discouraged and depressed. And maybe you see some of these symptoms. Maybe you can objectively recognize some things. Well, the good news for all of us is the story doesn't end there. He got it changed around, and he came back to being himself. Luckily, this was just a blip on the radar. And for anybody who's listening, it can be the same for you as well. I just want to note a couple of things a few things that he did that changed this. And he had to have some encouragement. You see, that's the thing, is when we get down into this bottom, there's no momentum, just the tendency to want to just sit there and stay there and do nothing. It's a law of physics, right? Body at rest tends to stay at rest unless it's moved out of. So he had some encouragement, and God was a little bit stern with him at times. But anyway, 4 things he did. Number 1, he got rest and refreshment. He did that. Verses 5-8 of chapter 19, he's getting a nap. He's getting some food. He's getting some rest. He was exhausted, and now he's resting up. And that appears to have really helped with his mindset. And we know from experience that it does. So maybe for the person who feels like they're just in the same state, maybe you need to get away. Maybe you need to retreat a little bit, take some time off, get some rest, stop burning the candle at both ends, cut back on the schedule, maybe say no, start saying no where you used to say yes, and get some rest and refreshment. And you might be amazed at how much more clearly we can see things and focus and mentally be where we want to be. Another thing that happened was he was reminded of his worth. In verses 15-18, God is basically saying, I need you. And see, he's feeling worth less. And we're thinking, no, how can he feel that way? He just did the thing on the mountain. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. That this is not logic. We've already said that to begin with. He's not thinking clearly. He feels worth less. He feels like there's no use for me. I've tried what's mattered. I wish I was dead. And God says, no, you are important. I need you. You have worth. And for anybody who's down, the same is still true for you. No matter how down you may feel, you have worth, you have value, you are needed, and to know that can make such a big difference in a person's emotional outlook on life. To feel that they are worthwhile and that they are needed. And he needed to hear this, and God was pretty firm with him. And oh, I need you. In fact, you need to get up. There's still 7,000 that haven't bowed a knee to Baal. You need to get back to doing what you need to be doing because I need you. So in being reminded of his worth, it really made a difference in his outlook. And we need the same thing. We all want to feel worthwhile. We all want to feel needed. And when we do, it can change our outlook on life. Another thing that happened is he went back to being productive. If you look at verse 19, he does see he was really productive in chapter 18. At the end of 19, he's really productive. Is he productive in between then? No, he's not. He's unproductive, and therefore he's feeling really down, feeling really useless, worth less. And it's amazing the direct correlation it has between people who get up and do things and go about and create their own momentum and go about being productive. It moves us along. That actually pushes the needle, whereas sitting there being unproductive has an opposite effect. So I would say to anybody who's sort of down in the dumps right now, sometimes you have to create your own momentum, and that's hard. That first step to get up from under the juniper tree is the hard part. But once you do, life starts looking a lot differently. So go back to being productive. Maybe that looks different for a lot of people, but focusing on somebody else. See, that's another thing. He was very selfish at this point, very selfish, and he's only thinking about himself. But he went back to being productive, and that made a big difference in his outlook. One more thing that changed is that he now goes back and he relies on a friend. Remember, he left his partner in verse 3, but in verses 19 through 21, he goes back to a friend. And that makes all the difference for him. When he left his friend, he went down. When he went back to his friend, he came back up. And again, this isolation and alienation may feel like what we want in this emotional state, but it's not what we need. And so if you have a trusted friend, if you had somebody just listen, somebody just to be with, not a lot, not Job's friends, but just somebody, And so he relied on a friend, and it made a difference. So he got rest and refreshment. He was reminded of his worth. He went back to being productive, and he relied on a friend. And this man, we see him change within the chapter, like within the setting, he changes. And so for the person who's listening, and you feel like you're in a really bad chapter of life right now, it can change. It can change mid-chapter, just the way it did for Elijah. And if we will do some of the things that he did, we can, I think, enjoy some of the benefits that he enjoyed once he made those changes.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Excellent points. When, I'll pose this in form of a question. You see Elijah as super productive in chapter 18. And then when he's threatened by Jezebel, it's quite possible that his thought was, I did this great thing and it still hasn't fixed it. And I think that is way too often really common amongst highly productive people or people with really solid work ethic is you expect real results every time you put in a lot of effort. I did my best. It should have turned out exactly the way I wanted. And with Jezebel's threat, you got Elijah thinking maybe it isn't. So when you connect it back to him rekindling his value, God instilling his value, no, it is working, you know. And the way God worked through you, Elijah, may not always be an earthquake. It may not always be a great fire or a big wind. It might be something small. So don't think that it's not working, thus quit, get back and be productive. What say you?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. He came off this great victory, and it's hard for us to. So I look at this chapters 18 and 19. I would have many, many times, and I still don't understand how he got in this condition. But that's also a reminder to me that I can look at somebody else and think I don't understand that. You know, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it really doesn't matter. If I were to objectively say, Elijah, I don't know why you feel this way, he would say, well, I don't care. Like, I don't care that you don't know. This is how I feel.
Correct.
So I think so the other side of that is for those of us who would want to help somebody. You don't have to understand. You don't have to even be able to empathize. You don't have to be able to fix. He felt the way he did for a variety of reasons, and one of them could have been, as you said, that he did this great thing and still, now he still has all these problems. So uh, it's certainly a possibility. It also reminds us that we will never really know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah. Amen.
And
Amen.
also, I should say, when we talk about depression and things like that, there are chemical and medical issues related. I'm not putting myself in dealing with any of those situations. Although I think in our society, a lot of what is considered um, depression could be fixed by and has been reversed by people who began to exercise and do things like that. But I'm not talking about anything that is outside of my realm of expertise here. But this was not a man who was clinically depressed. He was just in a really, really low spot in life, for a number of reasons that we can know, maybe a few that we cannot know, but he came out of it. And I think that's the main takeaway that we have today. So he's very relatable. He's not so relatable in chapter 18. He's very relatable in chapter 19. And so for the person who's in a down place in life, go back into this text and read it, take away some of these points, think about it, pray about it. And I believe that your chapter can change mid-chapter as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. I'm going to ask that if you know, when he's regaining his productivity, he's given the task of appointing two kings and then appointing his replacement. How much value can one feel, or how inspiring can it be to literally be investing in the future that's going to outlive you?
Yeah. Yeah. All goes back to what God says. I need you. In fact, I'm a little perturbed that you're just sitting under this tree because I've got so much for you to do. Get out of this cave, get out from under and go back to work. And so, well, we are all worthwhile. We're all valuable. We are all needed. When we get involved in that really changes. I remember one time I had this really down day. And I rarely have down days, but I was really down. And I really don't even know all the reasons why, but we went, my wife used to go visit this lady who was bedridden. She'd never been out of her bed in her life. And she asked if I wanted to go, and I said no, I don't want to go, because I wanted to sit under my juniper tree. And then I thought about Elijah, and I thought, all right, go. And so I went with her, and my day changed, because I like whatever it was that had me under the tree that day was nothing compared to this woman's challenges and problems. And she's smiling and I'm not. Like, so what is wrong with me? Sometimes the focus is so much on self, and it was for Elijah. It can change when we get busy doing what we ought to be doing, and thinking about other people as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Appreciate that. So, the I think the plan is to tackle a few of these stories and just highlight some of these real valuable takeaways as you said, we can't know everything. There's a lot of inference that would be required to understand every little detail. But there's some big points that we can take, which is you can have your highs and you can have your lows, and how do you get out of those lows, and how do you allow God to work in you? And it sounds like one of the things you're highlighting is, you got to get back to being busy. And for some people, that may start off with just get up and take a shower and get yourself dressed and go do that first thing, or go do that difficult thing, like go visit someone else. Take some of the focus off of you. With the pandemic and so many people spending so much time at home, it really fosters an environment where you can spend way too much time in your own head, thinking all about you and not about ways to be productive and resourceful for other people.
Yeah, and I would say not busy, but productive. I
Mhm.
think we can use busyness as just a big distraction from dealing with what really needs to be done. So we can be really busy. Um, that's not really going to help, probably. Being productive does. And so, yeah, I think, I guess the bottom line I want us to see is that this is a man that lived a long time ago in a culture and a place that we can't identify with, but he's relatable. And people are people and always have been.
Amen.
And I think that's what we're going to see as we look at some of these Old Testament characters.
Yeah, the geography in the Bible is accurate, the history is accurate, and the psychology is accurate. Right?
People are
There's
people,
That's it.
always have been.
Always will be.
That's a good idea you have here that we'll look at these Old Testament characters. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much, Keith. Take care.
Yeah, enjoyed it. You have a great day.
All right, you too.
All right,
See you. Bye bye.
bye.